What I'd like to do in this presentation is talk about some of the ways in which health practices for men can be displays of gender, and in particular I'd like to look at how men consume alcohol, men's dietary behaviours, men's perception of their weight, and finally how men choose to seek help or delay seeking help when they are experiencing a health-related issue. So just to give you an overview of some of the gendered lifestyles that we see here in Ireland, if we look at smoking, currently, according to latest statistics, 26% of men currently smoke when compared to only 20% of women. And among those who drink, the majority binge drink on a typical occasion, while fewer than 20% of women drink to this level. So it's not just the volume in which men are drinking in Ireland, but it's how they're drinking and their binge drinking in particular that's quite different between the genders. And a third of women and just over a fifth of men eat the recommended minimum daily portions of fruit and vegetables. So let's consider alcohol and alcohol consumption as a means of displaying gender. This quote, "If I cannot scull 16 pints, I'm not a real man," was said during the data collection for the National Men's Health Policy. I'd like for you to consider for a moment as you're sitting there, what alcoholic drinks might you consider associated with a masculine identity and what might be considered associated with a feminine identity. Certainly in Ireland, pints of Guinness, large volumes of alcohol are certainly associated with being more manly. And in my experience growing up in Ireland, women were supposed to, or nice women, drank glasses of beers or stouts, but not pints. Also look at the image here. This gentleman is holding whiskey, a stereotypically masculine drink. So again, a strong liquor that is associated with the masculine identity. Alcohol in particular is used as a symbol of being male in many Western societies, as part of a male sex role and of being manly. And naturally, this association influences consumption. And it's evident from data that's been gathered here in Ireland and elsewhere that men's drinking behaviours in many societies have been normalised. So if you look at the second point here in Noel Richardson's report back in 2004, Getting Inside Men's Health, half of the men who consumed 50 units of alcohol per week, in other words, over twice the recommended maximum limit of alcohol consumption in a week, these men consider themselves to be moderate drinkers, while 9 out of 10 weekly binge drinkers similarly considered themselves to be light or moderate drinkers. So despite a public health concern, particularly in Ireland and I know in other countries where alcohol consumption is high, men themselves do not appear to consider their drinking behaviour to be problematic, nor do they associate their level and pattern of alcohol consumption with potential health outcomes. So this belief or this perception that men have about what they're doing with respect to their alcohol consumption, how normal it is and how as part of being a man is clearly at odds with public health guidelines, and it demonstrates firstly a lack of awareness of what constitutes healthy drinking, but also a minimising of serious heavy or binge drinking and its impact among men in Ireland. So there is this attitude of it's part and parcel of being a man, it's part and parcel of growing up, and we have to man up and not be considering the consequences of the behaviour. But the role of the behaviour in demonstrating masculinity is more important than the potential health consequences. In recent years, there's been a number of really interesting studies looking at the association between alcohol consumption and masculinity. And I suppose this slide summarises some of the key findings from those studies. If you'd like to read more on this, There's been a lot of detail written on this in the reference document for Ireland's National Men's Health Policy that's available on departmentofhealth.ie. So I suppose the key findings would be that, in particular, heavy drinking, problem drinking, alcohol abuse in particular is associated with more traditional masculine ideologies, that alcohol consumption is often used as a rite of passage in male settings, and that, you know, consumption amongst peer groups is an enactment, a very public enactment of conventional masculine identities. As you can see here, heavy drinking is associated with physical stamina, risk-taking, brutal honesty, defying social convention, and seeing through social practice, or pretense, all qualities that are admired in men. And I think the defying social convention is particularly interesting because this is something that has been found when studying other health behaviours for men. And this piece around men's need for autonomy and control in their lives, to be the rule makers and the judges of their own behaviours, is really important, I think, for policymakers and for practitioners on working with men around supporting them to understand and work with, I suppose, social convention, but also be very much involved with the intervention that they engage with. We know that traditional masculinity in particular is more strongly associated with alcohol use and problem drinking. Specific male settings such as military units, so military units and college fraternities in particular encourage men to abuse alcohol as a common male rite of passage. In Ireland, there's a very strong association between manliness and drinking capacity, and that excessive alcohol consumption and binge drinking in particular are used as very public displays of allegiance to a mere peer group. When we look at types of alcohol, the consumption of beer in particular with fellow males seems to be a potent resource for the enactment of conventional masculine identities. It's noteworthy that in Ireland, beer accounts for 84% of the total alcohol consumption in men, in comparison to 43% in women. And again, what's very interesting with respect to this particular behaviour, but is also really relevant for other male behaviours, is that men report more difficulty in refusing an alcoholic drink from male friends than female friends. So there is a very strong association between masculinity and, I suppose, heavy drinking, displaying your drinking in public, and excessive drinking, binge drinking as a male rite of passage. And I suppose maybe I'd just like to emphasise that many of these behaviours are more strongly associated with traditional and conventional masculinities. However, these behaviours are also really evident among young men, and it's noteworthy that young men consume greater volumes of alcohol and have a greater propensity for binge drinking than older men. And in Ireland, 23% of male college students felt that it was not the volume of alcohol they consumed that was important, it was whether it showed or not. So it was their capacity to kind of hold their drink and not be overcome by it. And because of the widely held belief that alcohol use is an acceptable part of attending college and therefore a normative behaviour, male students believe that they wouldn't even know if they had an alcohol problem until after they finished college. So college is a setting, young men attending those colleges, it's a particularly relevant environment for alcohol consumption in terms of excessive drinking, binge drinking, and as being a very public display of their masculinity, to the point that within that setting, that type of consumption is so normalized among young men that they wouldn't even know if they had issue or a problem with their alcohol consumption until they actually left that environment and maybe were able to reflect in some way or compare their consumption to another setting. As we move on to dietary behaviours, I think much of what I've said with respect to alcohol consumption may begin to resonate or replicate as we look at this particular behaviour. And I entitled this slide, "Real Men Don't Eat Quiche." And again, I think it's one of those very typical statements that you may or may not have heard before, that again associates quiche maybe with something that's particularly healthy, something that's particularly soft, something that possibly women eat more than men, and therefore if you want to be a real man, you don't do that. And Goff and Connors have done some really interesting work around dietary behaviours and their association with masculinity. And we now know that there are several factors that influence the dietary behaviour of men that include their attitude towards food, their perceptions of nutritional behaviour, maybe some practical issues in their lives, this intrusive health lobby, which was named as defying social convention when it came to alcohol consumption earlier, and a monotony and a lack of substance of healthy eating, but necessary when physically vulnerable. So I'd like to explore some of these with you in further detail now. Okay, so in terms of their attitudes towards food, we know that working class men can regard food in terms of fuel, and they don't associate it with their health, while middle-aged men may reject this notion of food as merely as fuel because they regard it as one of life's pleasures. Again, they don't necessarily associate their food with their health. If you look at the image here on the right, you can see how food can be marketed towards men. So eating like a man is represented here as this lump of red meat. It's a steak, it's medium rare, and we can see that nice red fleshy piece in the meat there. And understandably, you know, this ties in with the notion that certain foods, such as fruits and vegetables, are attributed to the male identity, whereas the meat, such as that presented here, stand for strength and virility and is therefore more attributed to men. We also know that eating style is gender dependent and can be a display of gender for men. So again, smaller meals and portion sizes are associated with femininity, and males consume more and eat faster than females. And notably, they tend to consume more when in the company of other men than they do with women. And as for the alcohol that I spoke of earlier, when men are in the company of other men, they report more difficulty in ordering a healthy diet option. So again, this environment, this male environment, or a display of masculinity as a collective is evident in eating practices for men. But also this notion of a government initiative or an advertising campaign or these outside influences effectively telling men how to eat are regarded by many men with disdain. They view the information as misleading, ideological, even hysterical, and the amount and confusion of dietary messages has been greatly lamented by many men. And they also view some of these messages as an effort to reduce their choices and freedoms, and they can react against them, preferring to forge their own paths with regard to the dietary habits. And again, if we consider this social defiance that was named with respect to men's alcohol consumption, these two notions are not a million miles apart with respect to these two different lifestyle behaviours for men. And there are also a number of practical issues that have a significant impact on the dietary behaviours of men. So in 2018, there are still many men who lack control over their diet because the purchasing and the preparing of the food that they eat are predominantly the responsibility of the women of their lives, and they don't actually play a role in this process. Secondly, nutritional knowledge is a really key factor for many men. Some men tend to not know the nutritional content of the food that they're eating, and this is particularly relevant, I think, for the dietary habits of single men living alone. And then many men are simply unaware of the implications of a poor diet on their health outcomes and would not know how to modify their diet to actually improve their health. For men who are working, there are also a number of practical issues that affect what they eat. So long working hours, particularly for those who work shift hours, long commuting times, all of these factors increase the reliance men have on convenience foods, on snacking and on eating out, and therefore, remove the control they have over what it is they're actually eating. And then men themselves, and many men, simply have expressed a preference for bad food, that they say they have an inborn preference for high fat and high sugars, and this has actually been found to be a physiological factor amongst men that is more prevalent among men than women, and maybe due to gonadal hormone secretion. So they simply, on a practical level, have a preference for foods that are not conducive to good health. And finally, and this goes back to this perception that I talked about earlier, is that many men simply see healthy eating as being a hassle, as being an experience around self-denial and being boring. And they also see these perceived barriers linked to maybe the more dominant construction of masculinity that's specify autonomous decision making over obedience and authority, and plenitude and fulfillment over scarcity and self-denial. So, on a practical level, men are really resistant to the hassle, the self-denial, and their perception of kind of healthy food being boring. That also is very relevant when they make decisions around their diet. So in light of the evidence that I have just presented around diet and gender for men, health promoters attempting to encourage healthier eating among men might do well to incorporate some of what's in this slide into any literature that's produced for men to promote healthier eating, or indeed the key messages around these areas should be conveyed to men in any interaction on a one-to-one or in a group basis to support men to eat a healthier diet. And the first of these is around emphasizing a personal choice and a responsibility that they have around their diet, and to gently encourage them to reflect on their dietary habits. And really key to this would be providing them with links to information, in other words, telling men how to do it and giving them space to do it in their own way, but also to create an association between healthy foods and substance and satiation, to counter these perceptions of unhealthy food as being inadequate and underwhelming, and where possible to feature images of tasty, healthy foods in generous proportions being enjoyed by classically masculine men, so that I suppose this current perception around healthy eating in men can be challenged in a positive way to support men to reflect on and to modify their dietary behaviours. And I know I'm going a little bit off topic here as I move into the application of some of this into practice, but I do want to show you how we have attempted here in Ireland in a particular health information booklet for men to take this evidence and to actually turn it into meaningful, language that men might relate to. So maybe some of the things that I'd like to bring your attention to here is, if you look at the second paragraph, we specifically name, a lot of men are not aware of the links between the food they eat and their health. Some men simply see food as fuel, as they do not know about food and how it works. Also, your partner may be the one who buys and cooks the family meals, so you may not have control over what you eat. So in some way, as practitioners, we're trying to say, look, we know where you might be coming from, and here's how we are offering you ways to actually, do something about your health. So in the next paragraph, you can see that we begin to inform men of how to eat more healthily, and under the heading "What is healthy eating?" you can see that we're trying to meet some of the myths that men might hold head on. So the first is, that there's a myth that a healthy diet means that you can only eat small portions of tasteless foods. We're saying no, healthy eating is not about depriving yourself of the foods you love. Healthy eating is about having a wide range of different foods. Choose the right amount and type of fat. Eat foods low in sugar and salt. And most importantly, it's about portion size and about how much. And then I suppose the last key message we have here is feeding into those messages that are relevant for men and linking them to healthy eating. And we're saying that, eating well is really important for men's health because it's essential for men to maintain their strength, virility, stamina, and vitality for living. And as you can see on the second page, we have top tips for better nutrition, where we're informing men of how to do it in very practical ways. And we've also got this image here to educate men about their alcohol consumption and, what a standard drink is and how many standard drinks are good for their health in a week. So this is just an example that I thought I'd share with you of how evidence informs how we communicate with men and how we gender sensitize the information and the messages that we give to men as practitioners. And the last behaviour that I'd like to discuss here is around help seeking and how men may delay seeking help in the course of an illness, and what are the factors that influence them to take that step and seek help from others. And I've chosen this particular image to the left just to highlight that even those men whom we may expect would have the capacity to seek help and to look after themselves by doing so, well, they may struggle too, and they may also resort to behaviours that are counterproductive to their health. And, relying on that bottle of scotch and getting stinko is unfortunately something that some men do in lieu of seeking help from others. And I suppose I'd like to set the tone here by acknowledging first off that there is a lot of evidence, and it's certainly been my personal experience and professional experience, that men are willing to engage in self-care and that men do take responsibility for their health. And we have evidence from Ireland and elsewhere that there are critical transition points in men's lives, such as fatherhood, such as when they become aware of their own aging process, and when they experience a health crisis, that these transition points typically coincide with men having a heightened sense of responsibility for their own health, which translates into greater self-care and responsibility for their health. And we also know from data from the UK that when men have been diagnosed and are undergoing treatment for an illness, well, there's a comparable level of self-care between the sexes. And also, if I could just share my own experience of working with men, particularly in the area of physical activity and weight loss, that when men make a decision to do something about their health, they have a very, very high level of commitment, and the outcomes can be very, very positive for those men. However, there's also strong evidence that men consult their medical doctor or general practitioner less frequently than women. We know that across all ages and socioeconomic groups, men are more likely to delay seeking help than women for a physical, a mental, an emotional, or sexual health issue, and that this has implications for both the diagnosis and the treatment of the particular issue that men present with. And there are also significant differences in the way men and women seek help about health. When men seek professional help, it has been suggested that they ask fewer questions than women do. We know from Getting Inside Men's Health that too many men leave their general practitioners not understanding the answer to the question that they've actually asked. We know that Irish men are reluctant to go to their doctor, and rather than go to their doctor, 3 out of 4 men reported adopting strategies of avoidance or silence in a way that they manage themselves through an emotional or a mental health issue in particular. And this holds true for younger men. The Clon study is a college lifestyle survey that's conducted in Ireland, and in response to how students felt they would respond to feeling very anxious or depressed, male students were significantly less likely to seek help or to access help from a counsellor. They were significantly more likely to adopt negative responses, which unfortunately can often be excessive alcohol consumption, and they are, which I think is particularly relevant as well, is that they are significantly less likely to use their own social networks of friends, parents, or other relatives as a source of support. So it isn't just simply that young men are less likely to use services, but actually they also struggle to seek help within their own social networks, and possibly the few options left to them are negative things that would, have damaging effects for their health or compound the health issue that they currently have, such as drinking excessively. We know from a lot of research conducted in this area that there are many factors associated with delayed help seeking, as has been stated with a number of other behaviours. Knowledge of health and risk can be quite poor among many men, and therefore men may struggle to recognise symptoms of ill health that will delay their help seeking. They may have a general lack of awareness of health. There's a lack of engagement with and utilisation of health information that might improve their risk appraisal. And I suppose many men, which I think can often be a positive thing, I know from Getting Inside Men's Health and other studies that have come after, is that men often view their health to be much better than it actually is. And this may have something to do with their propensity to trivialize symptoms, to normalize them in some way, sure, that's just how it is as we get a bit older, or just get on with things. And all of these specific factors, such as symptom recognition, awareness of health, their use and engagement of health information, and their trivializing of symptoms, underpins what is ultimately a poor capacity to appraise the risk to their health, and therefore they're slower in actually responding to the risk. I think also it's really noteworthy that many men speak of a fear that they have of maybe something being wrong with their health, and possibly not wanting to really know that and have to deal with that. And for me, I think this is also linked to their knowledge and their awareness of health, because some of the fear that men may be experiencing may be unfounded. They may simply not know that what they have could possibly be highly treatable, and they could move on from relatively quickly. Something else that influences their decision-making process around seeking help is a perception that many men have of the GP practice, which this is our general practitioners, which is the first port of call, certainly in Ireland, around health, is that they perceive it as a female gendered space, and that many men don't feel comfortable or feel that they have even permission to be there. And again, in the Irish health system, due to, I suppose, over utilisation and undercapacity on the service side, lots of consultations can really be constrained to a very short period of time. Some say 5 minutes, some say 7. It depends on the practice that you go to or the part of the country that you're in. But ultimately, many men feel constrained by the amount of time that they actually have to engage with the practitioner, which puts them off actually going. And masculine beliefs that men may hold can also influence their decision around seeking help. Olaf and others have done really good work in this area and have taught us that many men struggle to acknowledge their symptoms or illness to others or even to themselves, and they avoid seeking help because of the stigma around seeking help and what that means or how that might clash with their masculine beliefs, and they try to conform with the socially prescribed male role of being strong. And if seeking help is viewed as a sign of weakness, well then that is something that a man who conforms with a socially prescribed male role would opt not to do, for fear of being seen weak and wanting to remain appearing strong. However, many men have found ways to maintain their masculinity and also seek help. And there's some really interesting research in this particular area that has, I suppose, equipped us with ways to understand this process. So Scholz et al. Have found that men may resist the stigmatized and the feminized position on help seeking by actually constructing help seeking as being responsible and wise, and pitching failure to seek help as something illogical or stupid. And again, if we think of some of the attributes that can be associated with masculinity, well, responsibility and wisdom would sit there. And I suppose reframing these attributes in association with help seeking is really useful in terms of supporting men to actually seek help. We also know that in that decision-making process, there is a sliding scale of acceptability in terms of the normativeness of the problem. So when a problem can be normalized, it makes it easier for men to seek help. And there have been some really good examples of normalizing men's health issues in group work for men, in terms of Men on the Move that I'll speak about later, and in football fans in training, that by creating groups where men can work together to improve their health issues can be normalized, which makes it easier for men to seek help for those. We also know that for many men, they need to achieve a threshold of ill health that is deemed acceptable before they can seek help. And in this particular study, Getting Inside Men's Health, I specifically remember one of the examples given for this, whereby a man was obviously experiencing pretty severe prostate issues, and he was really struggling to empty his bladder. And when a practitioner came to his home and actually supported him through a medical intervention to empty his bladder, the fact that he filled 3 bags was almost like a show of strength, that this is how bad he was, and as a result it was okay for him to seek help as a result of that. And then there's this process that many men engage in, where they look at the loss of autonomy and control in their lives and what might be the outcome for them of seeking help. And this is particularly relevant in some professions that men engage in. And there is evidence, that this weighing the balance of autonomy and control between life before seeking help and life after seeking help, it's very relevant for the likes of firefighters, who, again, that weighing the balance is related to kind of the hierarchy of threats to their masculinity. So, for example, for those men whose occupational role gave them access to a strong masculine identity, early help seeking, even for trivial symptoms, was deemed important to allow them to maintain their job. So it was a responsible thing for them to do, that by seeking help, they still had autonomy and control in their lives, whereas in fact not seeking help, they might lose it. So therefore, this gave them permission to seek help even for trivial symptoms. This weighing the balance is also really relevant for particular health issues. And the next example I have here is with respect to sexual health. So for some men, the balance is about being able to have sex or not. And effectively, not being able to have sex posed a greater risk to their masculinity than seeking professional help in a timely manner. So again, this weighing of the balance about having autonomy and control in their lives is a process that men can engage in with respect to the specific health issue that they're facing or the specific role that they have in their lives. And again, I think this is really relevant for practitioners to be aware of in terms of how to actually intervene with men in terms of adjudicating where the balance may lie in that process. However, I suppose despite what we now know of gender and men's health and how many health behaviours and practices that men engage in are simply mechanisms of doing and displaying gender, I do think that in 2018 there is still a lot of truth in this statement, that there is a perception that men in general are still seen as unreliable and irresponsible when it comes to their health, and that they're difficult to work with. And if this is the general perception amongst practitioners, it is easy to believe then that when resources are scarce, which they certainly often are, and they still are in Ireland, that those resources should be allocated to other initiatives that are more likely to succeed. And I think that the latter part of this quote really needs to be continually challenged by producing initiatives that are informed by what we now know and understand of gender and men's health, that we develop initiatives that are gender sensitized and that they're fit for purpose. And there are many good examples in Ireland and elsewhere of when services and initiatives are gender sensitized, that men do engage with them to really good outcomes for both themselves and their health and the health and well-being of those in their broader communities. And what I'm going to move on to now in the next presentation is to demonstrate what we now know about how to engage men and how to gender sensitize interventions, and show you a couple of examples of what those look like.